With people struggling to make ends meet, why wouldn't the government come in and start running grocery stores in order to drop prices and relieve the burden on working families? Well, let's analyze the arguments in favor. First of all, what is the point of the government owning a grocery store? The arguments in favor usually include either higher costs associated with food or the existence of what's been called food deserts, which is to say an underserved area where the population size might justify a grocery store and yet one doesn't exist. So essentially, one is a cost issue and the other is an access issue. Let's address cost first. So if politicians have an issue with how much grocery stores are charging, they should probably start by considering all of the costs. This includes things like buying property, electricity, air conditioning, spoilage, transportation costs, maintenance, salaries and benefits, advertising, market analysis for commodities, and much, much more, all of which account for the various costs associated with managing a large-size grocery store. But then there's other costs. You have to look at things like taxes, government regulations, and losses sustained from theft, vandalism, legal disputes, and spoilage. Now, that all sounds like a pretty complicated and expensive endeavor for someone to engage in. So, what are the typical profits on a grocery store? Well, after all of that is taken into consideration, the profit margin on your typical grocery store in America is around 1 to 3%, which is pretty thin. So now that we know a little bit about the cost and complexity associated with running a grocery store, the next question is, how would a government-run grocery store provide a cheaper or more affordable alternative? People like the Democratic nominee for mayor in New York City, Zohran Mamdani, have suggested that not relying on the profit motive will help him pass on savings to the customer. Well, as already discussed, the profit margin on grocery stores is incredibly thin. And one thing the profit motive does really well is, motivate. Yeah, it motivates people to develop efficiencies, to be customer focused, and to use time and resources well, since poor management of resources results in losses, which results in a store to go out of business. Now, in practice, which is to say in reality, government-run grocery stores have been tried before, and it turns out government bureaucrats don't run grocery stores as well as people motivated by profit. In order to get prices lower, the government doesn't come up with new and innovative efficiencies. It just uses tax dollars to subsidize the cost of operating the store. And therefore, the groceries may appear cheaper to the customer, but they're not actually cheaper. In fact, in most cases, they're more expensive than the ones at the private sector store. All the government's really done here is hidden the cost of the groceries with tax dollars on the back end. The grocery bill may have gotten slightly better, but the tax bill has increased, hiding the true cost and deceiving the customer. Now, this would be bad enough on its own, but you've also managed to drive out the private sector grocery stores in the process. Why? Well, because they don't get to use tax dollars to subsidize their stores. Since the private grocery store isn't getting the same subsidies, they have to sell at higher prices. And since it's difficult to compete with a store that can simply take people's money through taxation, competing stores can go out of business or they never get built in the first place. Now, you might be saying, okay, fine, Nick, we understand. Government grocery stores are probably not really providing us a cheaper option. But what about food deserts, places where grocery stores should exist but don't? And that is a great question that you should probably ask your political leaders in your area. Because why is it that the supposedly greedy business owners who live to make a profit would refuse to make one in a certain area? And what you will typically find is that the narrow profit margins make it very difficult to set up shops in places with things like high taxes, cumbersome regulations, or crime-ridden areas that politicians refuse to do anything about. It is both tragic and a little comical to watch as local politicians stand outside a pharmacy or a grocery store and condemn greedy business owners for leaving their community, when it was those same politicians that cheered on the looting and vandalism of such stores during riots or refused to police or convict people for shoplifting. Here's a newsflash. When a business can't cover its costs due to crime, it goes out of business or leaves. That shouldn't be that hard to figure out. And while that might be tragic for the people impacted, those people need to start considering how their voting record is creating the conditions that they're complaining about. Government-run grocery stores might sound like a good idea when you focus your messaging exclusively on desired outcomes. But as soon as we start to actually consider the complexities, combined with even a simple analysis of the history of government grocery stores, we discover that it's an incredibly destructive exercise in political arrogance. But as we consider all of this, let me offer what I think is probably the best argument that can be made either for or against government grocery stores. And it's not about facts or figures or different methods of running grocery stores or economics in general. Instead, it's just a simple question. Historically speaking, do the people living in countries with government-run grocery stores like the arrangement? Or are they usually risking quite a bit to leave that country and get to the ones where the private sector runs them?